Hello everyone, and welcome to Who Created It and How. Today, we're diving deep into history to answer a monumental question. Who built the first palace? This isn't just a story about a building, it's a story about the dawn of civilization, power, and the very idea of kingship. So grab your explorer's hat and let's travel back in time. To find the first palace, we need to understand what a palace actually is. It's more than just a big house. A palace is a grand residence for a ruler, a head of state, or a very high-ranking person. It's a symbol of power, a center of government, and often a sacred space. So we're not just looking for an old, large building. We're looking for the birthplace of royal authority made manifest in stone and brick. Our journey takes us to ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, often called the cradle of civilization. This is modern-day Iraq. It was here thousands of years ago that humanity first invented cities, writing, and complex government. And where you have complex government, you eventually have kings. And where you have kings, you need palaces. Let's zoom in on a region in southern Mesopotamia called Sumer. Around 4000 BC, the Sumerians were building some of the world's first cities, like Eridu, Uruk, and Ur. In these early cities, the most important building wasn't a palace, but a temple. These temples, called ziggurats, were massive step pyramids dedicated to the city's patron god or goddess. The high priest, who lived in or near the temple complex, was the most powerful figure. He managed the city's resources, directed labor, and acted as the intermediary between the people and the gods. Life revolved around the temple. It was the economic, political, and spiritual heart of the city. So, where does the palace come in? The shift from temple-centered power to palace-centered power is a crucial moment in history. It marks the rise of secular hereditary kingship. For a long time, archaeologists and historians debated where and when this first happened. For many years, the spotlight was on the city of Kish. Ancient Sumerian texts, like the King List, name Kish as the first city to have kings after a great mythical flood. Archaeologists flocked to Kish, and sure enough, they found the remains of not one, but two large early palaces dating to around 2800 BC. These buildings had grand halls, courtyards, and thick defensive walls. It seemed pretty clear. Kish was home to the first palace. But history is like a great detective story, and new clues are always being uncovered. And a major clue was found far from the Sumerian heartland, in modern-day northern Syria, at a site called Tel Brak. In the 1990s and 2000s, archaeologists at Tel Brak made a startling discovery. They unearthed a massive complex that predated the palaces of Kish by centuries. This wasn't just a big building, it was a sprawling administrative center with workshops, storage rooms, and a grand feasting hall. This complex, known as the Eye Temple, dates back to as early as 3900 BC. But was it a palace? This is where the definition gets interesting. The Eye Temple at Tel Brak was definitely a center of power. It controlled production, stored wealth in the form of grain and goods, and hosted large gatherings. But it was also deeply intertwined with religious activity. Thousands of small stone idols with huge eyes, which give the temple its name, were found there. So was it a temple? Or was it a palace? The answer is likely both. It represents a transitional phase, a time when religious and political power were still fused in one institution. The leader of Tel Brak was probably a priest-king, a ruler whose authority came directly from their religious role. So, did Tel Brak have the first palace? It's a strong contender for the first building that functioned like a palace, even if it was also a temple. It shows that the idea of a centralized authority, with its own dedicated monumental building, was emerging much earlier than we previously thought, and not just in Sumer, but across the wider region. But let's not leave Sumer just yet. Let's go back to Uruk, the city of the legendary hero Gilgamesh. Around 3100 BC, Uruk was the largest city in the world, and within its massive walls we find another piece of the puzzle. While the main Inanna temple precinct was dedicated to the goddess Inanna, There are other large, elaborate buildings that don't seem to be purely religious. They have features we associate with palaces, reception halls, private quarters, and administrative offices. These buildings suggest that even in a city dominated by a temple, a separate institution of secular leadership was beginning to form. The ruler, or Ensi, was carving out his own space, separate from the temple's domain. So what's the verdict? Pinpointing the single first palace is incredibly difficult. It's like asking who invented the first wheel. It was more of an evolution than a single event. But we can trace the key steps. The story starts in places like Tel Brak, with temple complexes that take on palace-like functions, run by priest-kings around 3900 BC. Then, we see a gradual separation of powers in Sumerian cities like Uruk, where distinct secular residences for rulers begin to appear alongside the temples around 3100 BC. Finally, by 2800 BC, we have clear, undeniable palaces in cities like Kish, the homes of powerful kings who ruled independently of the temple priesthood. The rise of the palace wasn't just an architectural development, it was a political revolution. It signaled a fundamental shift in how human societies were organized. Power was no longer solely in the hands of the gods and their priests. It was now also in the hands of men, of kings and dynasties. The palace became the new center of the world. It was where laws were made, where armies were commanded, where wealth was collected and displayed. The palace was a statement, a declaration in brick and mortar that a new kind of power had arrived on the world stage. The power of the state, embodied in the figure of the king. From these humble beginnings in ancient Mesopotamia, the idea of the palace spread across the globe. Think of the Forbidden City in Beijing, the Palace of Versailles in France, or Buckingham Palace in London. They all owe a conceptual debt to those ancient builders in places like Tel Brak, Uruk, and Kish, who first dared to build a house for a king. They laid the foundation, quite literally, for a form of governance and a symbol of power that has shaped our world for millennia. So, who built the first palace? The answer isn't a single name or a single place. It was a process, driven by the ambitions of early leaders and the changing needs of the world's first cities. It was the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and the neighbors in ancient Syria who, brick by painstaking brick, transformed the temple into the palace and, in doing so, created a blueprint for power that would endure for thousands of years. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey back to the dawn of civilization. What piece of history should we uncover next? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Who Created It and How for more deep dives into the origins of our world. See you next time.